All right, let's talk about God. Capital G, small o, D, God. You know, I think like the conversation around God is something that people either extrapolate into some kind of abstraction, or they make it into something that is more about their personal experience with God. But I want to talk about God from like the big picture, the capital G God. And we're going to talk about God in a way that also exonerates Christianity as the premier religion in the world, and why Christianity in its essence is a patriarchal space, right? Like, why does it operate from a patriarchal position? Why did we get to that place where God was known universally as a father? And I want to tie that back into ourselves as men, like what that all means, and why Christianity then also got pushed so far with this notion, why people used it and found benefit from it. If it wasn't beneficial, I don't think it would spread. So let's dive into it really quick. So first I want to start from a place of biology. Biologically, from conception, everybody is female. Everyone is female essentially in the beginning of their coming into this world, and then something strange happens. Something interesting happens. We move from XX chromosome to XY chromosome. And scientists actually call this a mutation in some ways, right? So this mutation happens and boom, we're men. Or sort of, not quite yet. When we're still coming through and we're born, we're still held in a female space. We're still with like mommies and aunties, and you know, the dads are kind of gone. They're not really hanging out as much. They're out there hunting, doing things to support the aunties and the mommies that are all trying to kind of make it work for the kids that they're governing over. So boys and the girls, although boys have an aptitude, maybe there's something a little bit more, you know, rough and tumble. They still are hanging out with basically females. And in a way, they're still operating like women even at birth, right? So we start out that way, and at birth, we're kind of still contained in that space. For women, it's ideal, right? You're born perfect, essentially. You're born perfect, and you're born into a perfect environment with your mother. And so in many ways, your plan as a female is basically don't fuck it up, right? You're already good, you're here, now preserve what you have. For men, it's a process of development, right? We're born, in a way, you could say we're born as like handicapped women in some essence, right? Like handicapped girls. And we have to develop something that's totally outside the category we were placed in at birth into something that could actually serve the community. So for young girls, their biology will signal to them when they've reached a certain plateau in their life and there's a new change. It's called their period, right? So that period happens for them, and they get a bell in their body telling them it's time for them to now gestate into womanhood. For us as men, we don't have a signal that way. We tend to need something else. What we need is mostly support. In essence, young boys, and as I said before, like, think about them as like mutated girls, are in a deficient. We have a lack in a sense. And in order to suffice that, rituals were created through cultures, through tribes, through many civilizations. Or rituals that kind of were put in place to allow young boys to get that signal into manhood. Often that ritual was based in violence. That violence was something that was necessary. It was seen as almost like a sacrifice that they paid their due to enter manhood. And it could be like a beatdown. It could be walkabouts, like in Australia, where they bring you out, let you be, and see what happens to you. If people come and find you good, if not, then oh well. So a lot of young boys didn't make it through it, right? A lot of young boys actually like went for it and didn't pull out. So from this, we can see we're able to denote like the best of the men, right? The best of the men. And people really celebrated these ideas. You know, when you came back from the walkabouts or the beatdown and the violence that you were endued upon with other men, the women back in the tribe now saw you differently. They saw you as a warrior, as a brave person, as opposed to part of their more comfortable space in the restriction of women. So this idea of ritual is what's been codified universally in the Christian story, right? This idea of ritual is also what made the male evolution something that ties into something that's metaphysical. It's not just something that's biologically embodied, like with women where they have that signal, right? We need something more. We need an extension. In Greek, the word art is techne. And that's, of course, a word that's derivative of the word technology, right? The word technology comes from the word techne in Greek, which means art. And so it's an extension of ourselves. As we are the art of God, we as men, in our deficiency, we also need extensions in order to support our journey. We need tools, we need abilities, and we also need other men, mostly as well, in order for us to like continue and be more and do more. So as we move through this experience, having been ritualized into manhood through violence, our brothers can now trust us. They say, wow, look at what he did. Maybe he'll be good on the battlefield. I think I could trust him on the hunt. And of course, for a young boy, that was like super, super important because it made him have confidence in himself, made him feel as though he was a part of something great. Now, what this also did is it stabilized the community, right? And it created a hierarchy. That young boy, as he moved into the male arena, he understood who was dominant, who was in place, and where his place was in the totem pole. And he also had aspirations to move up the totem pole. Maybe he wanted to become chief one day, and he could, but he had to also understand the respect that was owed to the ones that were above him, and the violence that he endured was a definite way for him to get there and to internalize that. Now, I'm talking about this, and I know we're saying we're going to talk about God. My whole thing is to talk about God from something that's really rooted in our personal experiences, right? Like what we actually see in front of our face is the best way to figure out what is fact. And for me, I'm looking at this codification of young men through ritual and seeing how this kind of codification through our natural evolution as human beings were then like pushed into religious spaces, right? And promoted the idea of the patriarchy. Mainly because, again, the ritual brought us into a metaphysical relationship. And these rituals are passed down through our genetics, through our knowing, almost through past memory, through generations of men, distilled and purified even more and more to build out of itself the best men. Now, it's interesting. Why is this important? Why is it so important that men go through this? Well, what ends up happening if men don't have a ritualized reality with themselves and engaging with the Father to a certain extent in their life, they wind up becoming ultra violent. They end up becoming the murderers, the killers, the drug dealers, all the different parts of society that's kind of, gone astray. We know statistically, if you're raised by a single mother household, for example, that your opportunity goes way down. Most of the people that are on the streets that are homeless, drug addicted, and so on and so forth, are unfortunately from single mother households. Now we see something very different. When you look at single father households, although they don't have a mother and they would likely be better off with one, they're still able to produce children that are much more stable and can contribute to society in a much better fashion. So we're looking at it as like, why is this? Why is it that the fatherhood component is so important? And this is why I bring it back to God. This is where I bring it back to Western civilization. Our ancestors figured this out such a long time ago. They understood the metaphysical experience of our reality was based on ritual, and that the ritualization in our culture was deeply based in our relationship with manhood and masculinity. And in a way, we saw it as being so exemplary that we brought it into a space of worship. So in the West, we really worship the divine masculine. We literally worship the Father, right? Not just the Father in heaven, but the Father in our lives every day, every minute, the Spirit of the Father. Someone once asked me, what was the Holy Spirit? And I realized something. So the Holy Spirit is you. The Holy Spirit is you embodied as a man. I'm talking to men especially. The Holy Spirit is you embodied as a man, and the generations of men all the way behind you, the spirit of that man, the spirit of kings, the spirit of gods in the past, embodied now in you, is holy. And it is what is essentially worshipped around the world, especially anchored in the Christian tradition. So it's not something to look at it as far out there as this like abstract spiritual experience of you discovering yourself and all that. It has nothing to do with that. It really has to do with your ability to operate and cooperate with other men in the spirit of unity. So for a lot of guys, if they don't have a father to help them do that, they don't have an opportunity to know how to cooperate, and they can't really rise up without that. So you end up being indefinitely handicapped in life. Society really doesn't preach this stuff, and that's why I want to talk about it. We don't really talk through these things from this perspective. I'm hitting it from a biological perspective, a spiritual one, and also a sociological one. For some reason or another, knowing all these facts scientifically, if there's a divorce going on, more often than not, the mother gets the children, right? The father gets nothing. The father loses, actually, more or less. He ends up having to pay child support. All these different attributes are taking place in his life that, he has no control over, essentially. But I really, for me, it's like I want to encourage men to still have hope, in some way, shape, or form, if they want to have children, if they want to maintain that position. And I want to promote hope from a place of inspiration. I want to let them understand. I want to let us understand who we are, what we're here to embody, and what we can possibly influence from our embodied state, right? Everybody's got their take on things. This is mine, and it's based in fact and studies. So I'm going to have this conversation more deeply. We're going to do a lot more on this channel to talk through aspects of manhood, and I'm curious to know where you are in your journey regarding it. So let's continue the conversation.